We read in the book of Genesis that God made man in his image. In his image, God made him. Now, what does that mean? It means something with respect to the human ethic, obviously. How are we to go about imaging this God who is beyond us? Well, let's call this God transcendence, because it has to do not just with personal relationships, but it has to do with our relationships with reality in general, with everything, with the stars, with all of nature, as well as with individual people. So if our call is to image transcendence, how do we do it? Well, I guess first of all, we've got to know something about transcendence. And transcendence is known in two ways. Transcendence can be known by experiencing it, and transcendence can be known by knowledge about it, fact mastery. We know all about fact mastery because that's what our culture is all about. But we don't necessarily know a lot about how do we experience this orientation to transcendence. Well, we experience it as an invitation. We experience it by knowing, in a sense, what we ought to do. That knowledge is limited, but it's real. We experience it by knowing what we ought not to have done, and that experience is limited, and yet it's real. We experience it in our knowledge of falling in love and finding in that person, experiencing in that person, a transcendence that perhaps is beyond any of the self-knowledge by that person. So we are constantly involved in this kind of imaging God in our ethic. We try to adjust our ethic to actually where that transcendence is, what it's calling us to. Now, great thinkers 200 years ago were involved in a fistfight almost concerning this imaging of the divine, this imaging of transcendence by immanence. Some saw that there is this gnosis by which we identify with transcendence, but that identification is only partial, and gnosis can get us into trouble, because while it gives an orientation to one thing, it remains blind to other things. And so therefore there is a constant production of opposites, a constant production of value conflicts and war. So what did Kant say about that? Kant said, basically, that you take the opposites, the thesis and the antithesis, and you synthesize them. Yes, each synthesis is going to be, in a sense, a betrayal of the transcendence that you kind of sense in the opposition. And at the same time, it is, or can be, an approach towards that transcendence. So synthesis for Kant is the real ethical call in this imaging of the divine. On the other hand, there was Hegel, and then especially Karl Marx. And with Hegel, there was a confining of our knowledge of reality to fact mastery. And so he wanted a logically perfect fact mastery which could answer all questions. He was indeed ignoring the reality that fact mastery never identifies with the known thing. It's always essentially a betrayal of the known thing, but an assertion of facts about it. Karl Marx went further and simply identified with matter this knowledge that we have of reality. And he saw that basically these material expressions of reality are untrustworthy. And so therefore there is deconstruction necessary. And we have a constant war between what is and a revolution against its deficiencies. So what we have here, with respect to the orientation of Immanuel Kant on one hand and Karl Marx on the other, the orientation to reality is the difference between an ethic of synthesis and building and an ethic of war. This is the problem with which our times today must wrestle. And if we end up with Marx, we end up in eternal war. If we select the approach of Immanuel Kant, there is hope.